If you're someone who has a big, beautiful idea and see opportunity and you aren't afraid to act on it, this episode is for you. In my interview with Anna Chaud, she shares her incredible story and ability to launch a very successful company. She's helped over 200 entrepreneurs and founders over the last year and has really helped lead them to exactly what it is that they wanted to see based on her own personal experience. In 2014, she launched and founded Garden Bar, which is the first fast casual salad concept restaurant in the Northwest. In less than 5 years, she was able to grow her chain to 9 locations and increased over 600% in revenue. Garden Bar had received several business awards and was finally acquired in 2019 by Seattle-based Evergreens company. She is now the CEO of Sankalpa Leadership, where she coaches high-level executives and provides business advisory, strategy, and consulting. She also has a little bit of a background in finance, and she is just brilliant. You are going to love everything that she has to share, her experiences, and things that will help you move the needle in your own path. Okay, PowHERhouses. So today's conversation is going to be a lot of fun, and I am so excited, Anna, for you to share your experience and what you've gone through in your journey, because it's super cool. And I'm very intrigued, especially by the business that you started, because for those of you listening, you don't know this about me. I don't know why you would. I am obsessed with salads. Love them. I feel like a meal is not a meal without a salad. And my husband always harasses me because whenever we're in a different part of the world or traveling, he always glances at the menu first to see what kind of unique salad is on it. And if so that we can go there. So without further ado, welcome, my friend.
Thank you. I was so happy to hear that about the salad. I didn't know you're going to go in that angle, but I love it. That's just perfect. Thank you.
I didn't either. And I was reading it, your bio, actually, preparing for this. And I'm like, the universe is kind of a funny thing, right? But yeah, salads have always been my thing. I love, I don't know, I think it's like the variety, and I feel like it's healthy, even though all the shit that I put on it, it probably isn't, but balance, right? So, So how did you get into that? Like, walk us through the ideation of the business and where you started and then the journey that you've had.
Yeah, so it's amazing. Okay, so very few people that I know understand salad as a meal, right? I think especially in the United States, salad is usually a side dish. And I grew up in a different country. I grew up in Brazil, and usually with hot weather, you have salads as your main meal. And there was a staple in my household, and I always loved it. And interesting enough, it's been my comfort food for a long time, for reasons that my mom used to, work outside the house, and I would come home, and instead of cookies, I would have a salad waiting for me. And that became sort of my comfort. When I moved to the Pacific Northwest, I had left the Bay Area and kind of getting into the workforce again. I was in this position where I had very little time for lunch, and found myself going to Chipotle every day and having the Chipotle salad. And I don't know, it was maybe a few months in, I'm thinking, I have to have more than 6 ingredients, and you know how salads are. The more ingredients you have, the better, but it takes a while to do it. So I started thinking, I knew in the East Coast, sweet green was getting very popular. Chopped was getting very popular, but yet we had nothing on the West Coast, nothing in the Pacific Northwest. So one thing led to another, and the idea came about. I'm thinking, we need a place that is a fast casual where you can go in, assemble your salad, any ingredients you want. So that idea came to me. At the time, I met my co-founder, who was a restaurateur in Portland. And I said, hey, I'm not a restaurateur. I had never set foot in a restaurant back at the house. And so we connected, and he said, well, okay, well, why don't we try this out? And we did. I had gotten divorced, and I had a little bit of money from my ex-husband buying me out of my house. And I thought, well, I'm not going to buy a house. I'm going to open a business. And that's how it all started. I took that bit of money, funded the first location, and then Portland went crazy about it. Loved it. It was one of those things that you knew the city needed. And the restaurant was exactly what I had in mind. We had, about 50 ingredients on the line, all different sorts, different things from grains to meats to toppings to vegetables and greens. And that is and then it took off from there. Then we had second location, and we just sort of expanded and became sort of the Portland salad brand.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. Yeah. And what did you do before that? What was your...
It's funny because I get asked that question a lot. And I think people expect me to have this linear career, right? And like, oh, she started this and then. But I've had a very interesting background. So I was a business management financial consultant in the Bay Area for about 12 years. So for 12 years before I started Garden Bar, I was working with founders and CEOs of small to mid-sized companies, mostly in the operations streamlining and financial management, helping them really in like more of a CFO capacity. And so that's the bulk of my career. Moved to the Northwest to become a nutritionist because I've been into the health space forever and I really wanted to be in wellness and thought, okay, this is my chance. We wanted to raise our kids in the Northwest. And so it was a nice break for me to leave the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley area. And so started that pursuit. And then divorce happened, which it wasn't terrible. It was just an interesting play in my life. And that's when I'm thinking, okay, I can't really continue the studies. And now I have to, go back to work and all that. And I started, then I worked a little bit into the creative staffing world where I started a staffing company for a little bit. And then the idea of Garden Bar came about. So started Garden Bar. That was a 5-year run from concept to exit. So led the company from concept to scaling. And when we were about 9 locations building our 10th, we were acquired by our competitors from Seattle who wanted to come to Portland. And then I went right back into helping founders and CEOs again, and then sort of like mentoring and advising companies through the growth cycle from seed stage to growth, development, and then really helping them with the fundraising. So I've been doing that for the last few years and now working on launching my next company, which I now feel ready. When I got acquired, I thought this was never going to happen again. But it's like childbirth, you forget all about it and go over it all again. I'm thinking, my goodness, here I am. So that's what I do. So I work one-on-one right now with founders and leaders and helping them through the management. How do they go to scale their businesses? If that makes any sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh no, it makes a ton of sense. And interestingly, you said it wasn't linear, but I feel as though your experience was so relevant to know to actually scale Salad Bar, right? And all of that information and it's lines. Talking about nutrition in business and then the growth and the excitement of it all. And, I think it's funny, even if you feel exhausted or you're like, oh, I can't do that again, as far as birthing another business, it's like, part of me feels like, could I ever actually turn that off? Like, I don't know. So as you were growing Salad Bar and going through those stages and even that, and like, there's part of being in the restaurant business, which is very different than a lot of other businesses for so many reasons. But then the first time you've owned a business too, right? Yes. So even though you were used to helping facilitate on the finance end, and so it's very different. And I think sometimes before we actually take the leap and own a business, we make a lot of assumptions, right? And then we find out like real world, and we're like, oh, that is not how I saw this going down. So What some of the core things that you learned along the way that were definitely a significant lesson to you?
This is such a good point. So I'm going to start by, I don't know why I either do analogies with dating or parenting, but this one I'm going to do the parenting route tonight.
I love analogies.
So there was this book called, I Was the Best Mom Until I Had Kids, right? So it's the same thing. When I was working with founders and CEOs before Garden Bar, I thought I knew everything about being a founder and running a company. And it wasn't until I had my own that I'm going, ooh, I did not realize so many different things. So it was definitely the best experience to step in the founder's shoes.
Yeah.
Other than understanding the journey of being a founder. And because remember, you're a founder, but you're really not a CEO until you have that journey between you are a founder and then becoming a CEO. And I think that's an important journey because most women in particular, I'm not going to speak for men, I'll speak for women, have an identity crisis of what kind of leader they want to become.
Right.
And unfortunately, as we know, a lot of books in leadership and everything in leadership comes from men. And we try to embody a little bit of that style. And I think for me, one of the biggest lessons in that journey that I didn't have before was, what kind of leader do I want to be for this company? What do I want this culture to be? Mind you, before Garden Bar, as a consultant, you definitely want the best for your client, but you're not part of that company. It's not your heart and soul. I mean, you're there to advise, see them succeed. But in the end, I was executing their vision and I was executing the way they wanted to run it. My job was to facilitate and help them succeed in what they wanted. When I became a founder, now it's what's my vision? What do I want this to be? So those are the things that I had to learn early on because I had to execute on that vision. And that meant for me personally, 3 rounds of fundraising, understanding the business behind the scenes of restaurants. Because you were right. The majority of restaurants are not the majority, but I'm going to say a good amount of restaurants are more of a passion play for people who love the food, love their chef.
Yeah.
I wasn't that. I was a business. So for me, the lesson was strategy. I think that's one thing that I find that is still missing in the startup world. We tend to react to growth and react as opposed to building and creating a strategy and executing on that in a proactive manner. So to me, those were the biggest lessons I had, knowing what kind of leader I wanted to be, and then creating a vision and creating a strategy to execute on that vision, which is what I am really focused right now with my clients. That's the angle I take with them today, because I feel that that's going to really help them throughout the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's such a good point because often we don't actually differentiate the two between founder and CEO when you are the founder and the CEO, right? And we don't always recognize that there is a difference in with that leadership. And I'll say it was definitely a lesson, a hard lesson, series of lessons rather, that I had to learn over time too, as far as what is a leader really, right? What does that mean? And unlearning what I saw from other leaders, because of course, naturally you want to emulate what you've been taught, and realizing that wasn't aligned with who I wanted to become or the culture that I wanted to really cultivate. And so, but I had like these hard lessons I had to learn, and I don't know if I would have learned them if I didn't just screw up in the first place, right? And have really amazing employees to give me very transparent feedback that I could grow off of. But I had to do some serious soul searching and investing. And I cannot even tell you the number of books that I just read, but then I didn't just read them, like really took them to heart and tried to practice in real time and navigating what felt congruent with everything that I wanted to see. And then learning how to inspire through that vision and truly lead. For me, it took longer than it probably should, right? And I think part of it was natural because I was always so constantly energized and excited that people naturally gravitated towards that. But what I had to learn for me was the leadership and the patience in leading in empathy and communicating, right? For me, that was hard because I didn't want to deal with it. And so I'm curious for you, as you learned that style for yourself and what you wanted within your organization, now that you were the actual leader, what were some of the tools that you used, or what helped you along the way in navigating that? And the reason I'm asking is because I think that it's one of our biggest blind spots as founders is how we are actually leading, because we don't always have the people in our lives to be honest with us, right? To be constructive in a positive way, or being willing to accept that. So I would love to hear that part for you, because I do think it's something so critical when it comes to success of an organization. And of course, now that you're even coaching others, that in itself shows us that we have a massive need for it. So I'd love to hear your part of that.
Yeah. So many layers to that. And some to start by, I'm just going to, there's a lot of layers. And I think this is really, really delicious to talk about. So I get super excited, as you know. So I think, first of all, let's start with the founder, right? The founder, when you start, you do it all, right? You're bootstrapping. You don't know. It's like, think about a founder as a stem cell. Okay. You don't know yet where you're going to be. Like, you're just doing everything until you're going to differentiate. Once you start growing, then you start going to differentiate, because you're going to establish a leadership team, a C-suite somehow. You're not going to do it all at once, but you're going to have your first C-suite hire at some point in their growth, correct? There is I think there's a misconception that every founder is a good CEO. That's not true. And there are a lot of founders that come up to that and say, I'm not the right person to lead this. I will stay as this position, I'll be CEO or whatever that is. But it takes a founder a lot of courage to recognize that they might not be the right person to lead that company. But there is a lot of, so much to talk about that. But my point being, as a founder, you're doing it all. You are wearing all the hats, you're bootstrapping, you're doing this. As you start to grow, and then if you really have a good awareness of what you want for your company and what you're going after, you start to learn where you excel and what you're good at. Where are you going to best serve this company? Needless to say, there's a lot of founders, there's ego involved, that they always want to be CEO. Doesn't mean that that's the right thing. And that's when coaches come in, or whoever, in executive, whatever that is. But for me, I started to learn. I read books like you did. I did a lot of reading. And then again, that's how I started. When I started, I was just like any other founder, right? I'm thinking, I'm going to be a CEO. I'm going to look at the CEOs that I admire, and I'm going to emulate that, hopefully be successful. And then I realized that it wasn't resonating with my team. So I remember thinking this through. And one time I thought, I'm going to try for a moment my flavor. What is my flavor of leadership? How do I interact with my team? What I think was going to work for them. And then I started trying out a few things that I believed would make them resonate. It would help them resonate with me. Because remember, when you become a CEO, you need to know what is your role. And there's only 4 things a CEO is responsible for in a company. If you have a full C-suite, there's only 4 main things that CEO is responsible for. Anything else you do that's not that, it's someone else's, right? So I started working on those 4 things and seeing how was I articulating my vision? How would people resonate, and how were they excited to join me in this journey? And that's when I started to realize what my strengths were. It's important to know that depending on the founder's background, that if they become CEO, they are going to favor whatever the background is. So for example, if I'm an engineer and I become a CEO, I am going to really be focused on the engineering team. If I come from a sales background, I'm going to focus on sales. I was a finance background. So I was like digesting numbers and giving all my managers like detailed P&Ls and helping them like calculate ratios that I thought this was important. We tend to lean towards our background, whatever that is. And that's not a bad thing, but it's important to know how you are articulating that to your team and can your team resonate with you? So it is a long-winded answer to your question. But for me, it was when I decided to figure out who I was and then started to work on some tools that I thought were important tools for my team to be able to support me in my vision. And it really worked. So I did very unconventional things. You know, we would have full-on meditation before coming into a meeting. Like we would have weekly meetings with all the managers. They all had to give away their phones. Like no one could check their phones. I needed full presence. I need them to all talk. I mean, I had things that I learned from different books. Like if you read, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, got pieces from that, and kind of created my own style by things that I read and that resonated with me. And then I sort of created my own flow. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's very similar to what I ended up doing along the way too, right? And taking the parts that I liked. And I love that you also weren't afraid to just do the things that spoke to your soul and how it worked with the team. And, I'm curious, and I'd love for you to share, because I think that the listeners are probably curious too, how you define the 4 roles that the CEO should be focusing on. That's
a good point. Yeah. So first thing is the CEO defines a strategy, right? So where am I going? If you imagine a ship or a boat or a yacht or whatever, you have the captain that is up above, and then the crew is down below helping, throw the anchor, do the machinery and all that. So if you're up above and you're like, guiding this boat, you set the strategy. I'm going to go from this island to that island. We were just talking about Croatia. So, that's how I think about it. So that's the strategy. And that strategy is going to be based on whatever it is that you're trying to do for your vision. So the first thing is they set the strategy. The second thing that the CEO is responsible is to come up with a plan on a strategy level, right? There is a different thing. One's called a tactical level, which is your crew that's there, like doing the micro things, like they're dropping the thing, they're doing that, they're executing on your strategy. But you have to have a strategic plan to get from this point to the next one, from a point A to point B. So set a strategy, create a strategic plan, assemble a team, and articulate it. You have to not only assemble the team, you should be able to articulate that to them so that they can execute. And the fourth thing is funding. So those are the 4 things that you have to provide the funding for this crew to be able to execute, right? So funding is a huge responsibility for the CEO, but the CEO, to be able to fund, they need to know what they're funding. So they need a strategy. And I keep saying this word because it's not a word. It's very rare that somebody, I'd say 9 out of 10 clients I work with, the first thing I say, what's your strategy? There is no strategy. They for them, it's more like, where am I going the next 3 months? I get that. But you need to know. So that's all of the 4 things a CEO should be responsible for.
Yeah.
Then you have your COO, who is going to be taking everything you're doing and converting into an actionable plan to then work with the team to execute, right? So you think of the COO as that somebody that takes it from you, translates into a workable plan. And then you have your CFO, who actually helps you what the funding plan is going to be. So each one of your team member or the C-suite help you and support. But if you don't know how to articulate that vision, how are they going to back you up on that? Like, how are they going to be on board with you? So learning how to articulate, but really get people on board and have buy-in is a huge responsibility of the CEO. The CEO has
Mhm.
to know how to get buy-in from the team. So when I hear CEOs saying, my team doesn't have buy-in, well, then we have to work on how you actually articulate and get them on board. I mean, that is, or if you don't have money, unfortunately, it's on you to get that money. Or work with somebody to work with your CFO to make sure that you are being, effective with your financials or whatever that is. But understanding numbers is huge. I feel like I cannot stress that, Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's my background, but it's important. Yeah.
Same. But they tell a story. And I find that a lot of the times too, and probably more so with women, is that they shy away from the numbers. And I don't think it's because they don't want to know per se, but the thought of looking like they're incompetent or don't understand them is what I find is a barrier, or they're afraid to confront them because they don't want to feel like a failure, right? Mm-hmm. So there's all this like emotion that surrounds it. And it's so ironic because I had a call with a client this morning, actually, and she was saying like, I'm so tired. It's been an investment year. I feel like our revenues are up, but every time I turn around, I'm spending money. And she was feeling like she wasn't successful, although she's had a growth year. And when you have a growth year, you're investing, which means spending. And by the end of the call and in dissecting the numbers, we realized that she's actually on a very good trajectory. But then also I just had my best month ever, because she actually looked at it. And it's so funny how much emotion we put around this numbers thing, right? And in knowing the finances, and to your point, like it is so critical, or to have somebody on your team who can help articulate it and tell you the story in a way that you understand as the CEO, because that will help with everything that you're doing with your team and communicating, and clarity is gold, right?
Yes.
For sure. And it's hard sometimes, I think, to get our creative, amazing vision that's vivid in our mind into like words that people can digest, right? And then know how to implement. So I think that's great, and I would love to hear, and I know this is something that you love to talk about as well, in really some of the struggles and pitfalls that you see with other entrepreneurs or founders found in traditional goal setting. So I talk about this a lot, and probably very different than what you're going to say, but the fact that, and the sad statistic that all of us set goals and about 11% achieve them. Mm-hmm. So what do you find in the work that you do that are the pitfalls and struggles of that?
Well, I would 100% say that traditional goal setting is a huge pitfall. Let me go back a moment, just step back on the numbers, because you mentioned something that's important. It's this idea that if I don't know my numbers, I'm inadequate. And I have to say that very few people learn how to read a financial statement. I mean, in particular, because most people don't even know the difference between an accountant and a finance person. It starts right there. Right? If I ask a client, what's your financial protocol? They always say my accounting, my bookkeeping. And I need to say, accountants are the people who put the numbers on paper, and they should be putting that correctly, where the financial people are the people who read the numbers. So I say, imagine you take your lab, you're going to do a blood test, the person who actually draws it and puts it on paper is your accountant, but the doctor reads it and then tells you what you need to do. And your financials are nothing different than your labs. It's a piece of paper that tells you the health of your business, right?
That's a great analogy, by the way.
But you know what I mean? But it is, right? We say, okay, pictures of this is what's going on. And most people don't even know how to read. So I just had a meeting yesterday where I said, okay, you're going to sit down and stay with me. I'm going to teach you exactly what are assets, what are liabilities. I feel the need so that there is some sort of like there is a confidence when I say, what's your gross profit versus your net amount, because these numbers Unfortunately, when people ask you for goals, what do? You give a percentage of growth that you want, right? 100%. I have never had any founder, if I say, what are your goals? And they're going to say, I want to grow by this much. I want to grow by this much. I want to make this much profit. Is always a reference to numbers. So if you are setting your goals as a reference of your financials, but you don't know what your financials mean, it starts right there that you just don't know. You're pushing for something that you were conditioned to say. Now, let's be honest. You and I are part of an organization of entrepreneurs. We've been to a lot of seminars, and I don't know if you've been asked what your BHAG is, but I flip every time I get asked that. Why? Because big, hairy, audacious goal. I'm not saying that you don't have to have one, but the majority of BHAGs are numbers, right? $10 million in revenue. This is it. So we are conditioned to respond into an inflated growth amount without knowing what that translates into. So when I say your pitfall is traditional goal setting, is only because in the past, remember, I have this garden bar experience. Before garden bar, if I went into a company and they said, I want to double my revenue, I would say, okay, let's go. Let's work on it. No questions asked, I would execute. Post garden bar, if you come to me and say, I want to double my revenue, I'm going to step back and say, why? Let's find out what that means.
Yes.
Do you want to double your revenue? Do you want to double your return? Do you want to double the amount you take home? What is the goal here? And so I changed the word goal to intention. Unfortunately, because I feel like intention to me gives you a little bit more freedom for the goals that you're going to hit. So that's the name of my company, of course. So then I obviously do that. It's called Sankalpa. But as traditional goal setting will limit you to a certain target. So if I say, Nicole, what's your goal? You say, I want to own a Porsche. That's a goal. It's a valid goal. And then you're going to be focusing on that Porsche. But if I say, what's your intention behind that? I mean, this is not a thing new. Everybody's heard that before, but I do that with my clients. Then you say, my intention about a Porsche is I want to drive something fun. I want to drive something fast. I love the way I feel in a luxury car, whatever the intentions are. When you give me those intentions, now I can say, you know what? You can get that from a Ferrari. You can get that from a Lamborghini. You can get that from an Aston Martin. The Porsche is not the only car that's going to give you those intentions. So that's just an analogy to say that when you give me the intention behind your goal, if you say, I want to make $88 million in revenue, and I'm going to ask you why, I may be able to say, hey, you can make that same thing with 6 million, or maybe we need to, I don't know. That's a limited goal. So that's why I find traditional goal setting is very conditioned, is socially conditioned. You are expected to say something, but you don't really know why or how and what that translates into.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because that is, again, something that I say all the time is like, what is the why behind the reason you just said that? And we address that all the time in financial planning, because we will have clients say like, oh, I just want to save $1 million in, 10 years. Okay, great. Why? Because again, conditioned to say a specific amount, but they don't know what that means or how it applies or is it relevant? It's like, well, you actually may need to save 10 times that amount. Or
exactly.
On what it's for. And even back to the business example on a revenue, again, we're conditioned to say that's what all these coaches, which are like the Wild West these days, you really have to vet you guys, like who you're hiring. But they all talk to revenue. They don't talk about profit. They don't talk about what you're doing with that or what it really means. And then, when you're saying, oh, I want to 10x my revenue, right? Do you want the business that requires? Like, sometimes I think we don't recognize the lifestyle, the business, the work, the team, that goes behind those numbers, whether it's a business perspective, financial planning perspective. Like, we don't always connect the two. It's that immediate, oh, I should want this, right? I should want this. To your point, I love that you use the word conditioned. I couldn't think of a better one myself, because it's so perfect to explain it. And it's almost like we don't think for ourselves to a degree, right? It's we know what we want, we know what we see, but because what we've been conditioned to think needs to be the response, it is. And then are we setting ourselves up for failure? Maybe, what is the expectation? And that can be defeating. And then what happens to your mindset and your potential, right? For living, I think, a life more aligned versus always wanting to strive for the thing we think. It's to your point is like the intentions of it, right? Like, how do we want to feel? So thank you for explaining that beautiful way.
I feel 100% on that. Yes.
Yeah. So before we end, and for everybody listening, by the way, I'm going to have all of your links in our show notes.
Okay.
So that you can connect with her, because she is just so brilliant, and your experience is something that I think so many people can leverage. What is a final thought that you would want to leave with all the listeners today?
One thing I always tell as final thought, and again, it's because of my experience working with leaders, right? And in particular, women who I work with a lot, is that we are, again, conditioned to what's next step, right? I got to this part, and then what's the next? And we keep looking at this, what do you call it? The little hockey stick, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. I love a growth. Believe me, I'm a fan. I just feel like it would be nice to take some time and enjoy a little bit of that moment before you go to the next step. So instead of just having a hockey stick, like, you have a growth and you walk a little bit in there, and then you go up again and you walk a little bit again. And why is that? It's because we have this idea that the moment you get to this, we get to the next, we get to the next, we get to the next, and we never stop that search and enjoy, not only enjoy where we are, but really figure out what is that we want next. That's something I try to leave people to just contemplate a little bit. We don't enjoy when we get to something and appreciate it and say, here I am, what's next for me and what's next for me. Sometimes, and I used to have a therapist used to say that, the next action is not an action, right? Or the next step is not a step. It's only because as I get older and I understand, and I lost my mom early. So it's one of those things, like when you are getting closer to where your mom was, you feel like, oh my gosh, what's my time that's limited, right? So I read this book called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. I don't know if you've read that, but I think you do. Is a great book for your clients. It makes you rethink how you choose and when you choose to live. And as entrepreneurs and founders, CEOs, or whatever we do, we're always in that trajectory, right? Unless we're growing. I think we can grow at the same time that we are walking and enjoying. We're growing personally by taking in what we accomplish and then plan the next one, because then you're going to know exactly what the next one is. It's not going to be planned for you. You're going to plan it. So that's what I love to leave people with thinking, try to enjoy, even if it's for a bit, and then find out what's the next one after you know what you've had. And is this right for me? Should I go to the next one? And then you go again, you grow, and then you go, and then you enjoy a little bit, and then you go to the next level. I think you're always going to be growing, but you don't have to just shoot at the top and then all of a sudden not know, did I get here? Am I arriving? You never know, right? Especially for us women, like, when do I arrive? Am I always going? Am I going somewhere? You know what I mean? That idea of always just going and not stopping. So, yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm. I love that. Yeah. Just take time to appreciate, right?
Take time to appreciate, take time to appreciate. Again, we were talking before the interview about taking time off and going places. Every time that you take that that time to recharge and reset, I think you double, triple your inspiration and motivation and your willingness to go to the next step as opposed to getting great and tired,
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree. And I used to say, like, sometimes the most productive thing you can do is taking a break, like doing nothing at all, right? And recharging. And I unfortunately, I learned that the hard way by burning out and being exhausted and completely useless. And it's like, if I wasn't such an idiot and didn't allow myself to get there, right, I wouldn't have experienced a much longer wall if I would have allowed vacations and breaks. And so, but again, it's what I was conditioned to think I had to do, right? So I think that, and you probably can relate to that being in finance and what that industry itself will require of you when you're getting started in the industry. It's really, it makes no sense. Really, you unpack a lot of it, right? And I hope eventually that will change, but it seems to be the one industry that never does from a culture perspective. But be it as it may, thank you for that advice and everything that you shared. So wonderful. I appreciate you, your time, your brilliance. And until
it's a fun talk. Thank you very much.
It was.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. And until the next time, my powerhouses, continue to be courageous.